Grammar Girl here. I'm Mignon Fogarty, your friendly guide to the English language. We talk about writing, history, rules, and other cool stuff. Today, we're going to talk about weird sentences that sound like they might have broken bones, and why you sometimes see letters in really old documents that should be an S but look like an F. What is up with those words that look like fubject instead of subject? Before we get started, I am so excited to tell you that Grammar Girl is on the Writer's Digest list of 101 best websites for writers this year. And it's even better than that because we're on the list for the podcast in the live streams, podcasts, and YouTube category. And there are only 6 shows in that category, so it actually means we're one of the 6 best shows for writers. Woohoo! So feel proud about spreading the word. You can tell your friends you listen to this great podcast they should try because Writer's Digest says it's fabulous too. For this first segment, I have a listener question. Helen wrote, quote, "Would it be possible for you to suggest a way to teach my friend not to name a noun twice in a sentence? For example, John, he bought a new car. The Reds, they won the game. And my mom, she looks pretty in pink." I can't even find a name for this faux pas in order to find a rule for it. Google doesn't understand what I'm asking. Hope you're able to help me. Many thanks in advance, unquote. Well, thanks, Helen. I actually get some version of this question pretty regularly. So here's an explanation from a slightly updated piece Neil Whitman wrote for the podcast many years ago about a sentence a listener named Tom heard on Planet Money that went like this.
Really, this whole fight, it doesn't matter for the deficit.
So the Cambridge Grammar of the English Language refers to this kind of sentence as left dislocation, which sounds unpleasantly like something that happened to one of my friends during a ski trip. In the Planet Money example, the noun phrase, "this whole fight," has been moved or dislocated to the beginning of the sentence, which is on the far left when the sentence is written out in standard left-to-right fashion. This dislocated noun phrase has been replaced in the rest of the sentence by the pronoun it, so that we end up with the double subject that's bothering Tom. This whole fight, it doesn't matter for the deficit. But left dislocation doesn't just happen with subjects. You can also find it with direct objects. For example, at a baseball game, you might hear, "Cold beer, you want it? I got it." Here, the direct object of want is cold beer, but instead of saying, "You want cold beer, I got it," the vendor dislocates cold beer to the front of the sentence and fills the direct object position with the pronoun it. Cold beer, you want it? I got it. You can also left dislocate the object of a preposition. Take this sentence, "My brother, a scout came looking for him at the football game." Here, the left dislocated noun phrase, "my brother," shows up at the beginning of the sentence and is then repeated later in the sentence as him, the object of the preposition for him, meaning for my brother. You can left dislocate indirect objects too, as in, "That drunk guy who kept trying to pick a fight, the police gave him a citation for disorderly conduct." The big left dislocated noun phrase is, "that drunk guy who kept trying to pick a fight." And it's repeated in the rest of the sentence as the indirect object of him. The police gave him a citation. You can even left dislocate noun phrases that would have been possessive if they'd stayed in their usual location. For example, in the sentence, "That woman who just moved in, it turns out her daughter is a Girl Scout." The left dislocated noun phrase is, "that woman who just moved in," and it's repeated in the rest of the sentence as the possessive pronoun her. It turns out her daughter is a Girl Scout. Left dislocation is considered informal English because the dislocated noun phrase just sits there at the beginning of the sentence, syntactically disconnected from the rest of it. Or worse, the left dislocated phrase may even turn into a sentence fragment if you separate it completely from the rest of the sentence with a period or exclamation point. In our cold beer, you want it, I got it example, cold beer is a sentence fragment. So why do people use left dislocation? Well, for one thing, left dislocation is useful if you have a noun phrase that would be awkward if it stayed in its expected position. Think about our example, that woman who just moved in. It turns out her daughter is a Girl Scout. It'd be pretty awkward to say, that woman who just moved in's daughter is a Girl Scout. Another benefit of left dislocation is that it makes it easier for a listener to process a sentence. Sentences are easier to understand if they present old information first and new information later. To see how left dislocation lets sentences do this, let's take another example from the same episode of Planet Money.
And the people who are less price sensitive, who are willing to pay more, well, they just don't spend that time and they pay full price.
When you say the people who are less price sensitive, who are willing to pay more, you're introducing a new piece of information. When you repeat it as the pronoun they just don't spend the time and they pay full price. Now it's old information, and it's easier to process with the new information about how they end up paying the full price. Finally, because sentences with left dislocation are considered informal, they can help set a friendly tone in presentations that are trying to make things simple and fun, such as the Planet Money podcast. When I listen to Planet Money, it sounds as if the hosts are having an unscripted conversation, even though each episode is carefully researched and planned. In fact, I occasionally use left dislocation in this podcast for the same reason myself. Even with those advantages, though, left dislocation is still considered informal, so you should avoid it in your formal writing. It's more appropriate in places like advertising copy, dialogue, or speech. But as you point out, Helen, it can stand out if people do it too often. Also, in your friend's case, if the sentences really are as simple as John, he bought a new car, and the Reds, they won the game, there isn't a big benefit to using it since it's not solving some of the problems we talked about, like introducing new information or working around a tricky possessive. So in summary, left dislocation, it's a useful rhetorical tool. But limit it to your informal writing or speech, and even then, use it sparingly, unless you want to become known for your language mannerisms. That segment was written by Neil Whitman, an independent writer and consultant specializing in language and grammar and a member of the Reynoldsburg, Ohio School Board. You can search for him by name on Facebook or find him on Twitter as Literal Minded and on his blog at literalminded.wordpress.com. If you studied the U.S. Bill of Rights as a kid or traveled to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. to see it in person, you might have noticed something curious. The very first line describes who's speaking. Congress of the United States, begun and held at the city of New York on Wednesday, the 4th of March, 1789. And in the very first word of that phrase, Congress, the second to last letter looks suspiciously like a lowercase f instead of a lowercase s, almost as though you'd pronounce the word congress. What is this weird letter? Well, it's called the medial S, or long S for short. Medial means in the middle, and between the 8th and 19th centuries, whenever the letter S appeared in the middle of the word, this elongated form was used. The medial S looks like a lowercase f if you took away the bar across the center, or if the bar only stuck out on the left side. This form was a holdover from how the letter S was written back in ancient Rome. In Roman cursive, the S was drawn like a check mark, with a tail at the top that floated out to the right. So why did English hang on to this long S while still using a regular letter S, even though they both made the same sound? Well, we don't know, other than to say that's how they did things back then. But what we do know is how the medial S was used. It was used only to replace a lowercase s, never an uppercase S. It was used when an S appeared at the beginning of a word or in the middle, as in subject or reason. It was never used at the end of a word, as in lotus or hummus. If a double S was in the middle of the word, as in possum, two long S's were used, making it look a lot like there are two F's in the middle. But if a double S appeared at the end of the word, as in bless, a long S was paired with a regular S after it, so it looks like BLEFS, blefs. Now that's a lot to remember. It's worth noting that S wasn't the only letter with mixed up rules in Middle English, which spanned the 12th through 15th centuries. For example, U and V were essentially the same letter. A V shape was used at the beginning of words and a U shape everywhere else, regardless of which sound you wanted to make. The letter I was used for both the I and the J sound, though a capital J was occasionally thrown in at the beginning of a word. Y was commonly swapped in for the letter I. Finally, a silent E was added to the end of all kinds of words, not only to mark a long vowel like place or bite. It was simply added for fun or for looks. We'll never know. Now, were all these rules confusing? Absolutely. In fact, this confusion spurred the push to standardize English spelling that started in the late 1400s. This push was reinforced by the introduction of the printing press in the 15th century. Printers began to standardize the spelling and punctuation of manuscripts in the name of simplicity. Their newfound ability to distribute multiple identical copies of a manuscript reinforced this more consistent spelling, punctuation, and grammar across a wide audience. But even with this push, it took a while for the medial S to disappear. We can blame that partly on ligatures, two letters that are joined together on a piece of movable type. SH, ST, and FS were common ligatures. Their use sped up the typesetting process and saved space on the printed page. However, this meant that printers who wanted to drop the medial S couldn't throw away one block of type. They had to replace every ligature that included a medial S. All these combinations had to be recast in metal, and the wooden cases that held printer's type redesigned. The nail in the coffin may have been the publication of Bell's English Theatre in 1792. This compilation of plays, including Shakespeare's, left out the long S. This sent a signal to other publishers. If you're not going to use old-timey letter forms in Shakespeare, why use them at all? One final note, the medial S did stick around in handwriting even after it disappeared in print. We can see it in handwritten letters and documents up through the 19th century. Furthermore, it lives on today in the German double S, a ligatured form that looks like a capital B. We also find it in calculus. The symbol for integral looks like an even more elongated medial S. The character actually comes from the S in the word summa, Latin for sum. So that's the story of the medial S. If you're ever in Washington, D.C., stop by the National Archives and look at the Bill of Rights. You'll get a first-hand look at the medial S taking center stage in one of the most important documents in U.S. history. And finally, if you want to try out the medial S yourself, you can create it using the Unicode combination capital U plus 017 capital F. That segment was written by Samantha Enslin, who runs Dragonfly Editorial. You can find her at dragonflyeditorial.com. Finally, I have a Familect story from a Grammarpaloozian named Amanda.
Hi, Mignon. This is Amanda from Lincoln, California. I have a family word that I'm hoping we can bring some justice to. Growing up, when my sister and I were hungry, or it was dinner time, or lunch, or snack, we would ask my pop what was for any one of those occasions, and he would tell us, "Schwinn, schwinn on Dill." We had no idea what he was saying. The words semi ran together like that, and I hesitate to break them apart because I really don't know if they are meant to be broken. But again, the word is "Schwinn, schwinn on Dill" was what we were having for dinner. Schwinn, schwinn on Dill. It's what's for dinner. I love being a Grandma Pelusian. I love the show. I love the knowledge that you impart on a grammarian. I look forward to hearing from you. I hope we can solve this ages-old puzzle.
Thanks so much, Amanda, for your support and for sharing your Familect. It's another one of those mysteries. Maybe it's something your pop completely made up, or maybe it's something other people say or said too. If anyone listening has heard this phrase or something close, please let me know. Tag me on social media or call the voicemail line at 833-214-GIRL. If you want to share your Familect, that's the number to call too. And if you're a Grammar Palooza subscriber like Amanda, you can also send a voice memo. I send text messages with fun facts a couple of times a week. It's a great way to support the show, and the first 2 weeks are free. To sign up, visit joinsubtext.com/grammar or text hello to 917-540-0876. Grammar Girl is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast. Thanks to Ad Operations Specialist Morgan Christianson, Digital Operations Specialist Holly Hutchings, Marketing Assistant Kamryn Lacy, Director of Podcasts Brannan Goetschius, Marketing Associate Davina Tomlin, and Audio Engineer Nathan Semes, who is currently in Brazil picking up his fiancée because her visa was finally approved and they are ready to get married. Huge, huge congratulations, Nathan. We're all so happy for you. And I'm Mignon Fogarty, better known as Grammar Girl. Remember to look for Grammar Girl conversations in your feed. This Thursday, I have an interview with Peter Sokolowski from Merriam-Webster about a really cool little dictionary that was made for the military in World War II, and about the upcoming Scripps National Spelling Bee. That's all. Thanks for listening.